Hello everyone. Dune Imperium is one of my group's favorite board games, and we recently had a game that ended after round 6. Afterwards, we started wondering if you got really lucky, how fast could you win a game? As we started to think through it, it turned out to be a really interesting puzzle. We ended up thinking about the problem as a sort of speed run, and in this video wanted to present our own record as well as issue a challenge to other Dune Imperium players. Before we begin, let's go over the rules of the speedrun. First, you must abide by all rules of the game. Second, you can control what other players do. In most cases, that's going to mean that people just reveal early and end their turn. And lastly, and most importantly, you can control randomness. This includes your personal deck, Imperium row, intrigue cards, and combat cards. What makes this puzzle so interesting is Dune has many of these cards, and finding the right order in which to play them all and all the right spaces to send your agents is quite tricky. Let's take a look at our own speedrun. To complete this speedrun, we're going to be playing as none other than the Baron. As part of the Baron's Master Stroke ability, we get to choose two factions that we later get bumps with. For that, we're going to choose the Bene Gesserit and the Spacing Guild. Let's see what we're playing for in round 1. Even though the victory point looks tempting, we actually want to go for second place here, which is going to give us an intrigue card and 2 money. Now we're ready to start the game, so we'll go ahead and give ourselves 1 water, and we'll also draw our first 5 cards. The cards that we want to draw are Seek Allies, Diplomacy, Dune the Desert Planet, and 2 Convincing Arguments. The first card that we want to use is Seek Allies, which we're going to use to send our agent to Hardy Warriors. Let's pay the cost of going there, which is 1 water, and then collect our rewards. First, let's move up 1 spot on the influence track. Then let's add those 2 troops to our garrison. We want to immediately deploy those 2 troops, plus 2 additional troops. The reason we want to do this is so that we can activate the Baron's Master Stroke ability and gain 1 influence with the Spacing Guild and Bene Gesserit. For our second turn, let's use our Diplomacy card to send our agent to Secrets. Visiting Secrets gives us a bump on the influence track, as well as an intrigue card. That bump gives us our first victory point. The intrigue card that we want to draw is Staged Incident, which lets us remove 3 troops from the conflict in order to get a victory point. Now we're ready for our reveal turn, and at this point we have 5 persuasion points, which we're going to use to buy a power play. At this point, we can go ahead and clean up our hand. During the combat phase of the round, we'll want to reveal and play our Staged Incident. So let's get rid of these 3 troops and gain our second victory point. For combat, let's assume that another player added troops, which would cause us to come in second place. Therefore, we can go ahead and collect 1 intrigue card and 2 money. The intrigue card that we want to draw is Demand Respect, which lets us gain an influence bump when we win a conflict. And here's that 2 money. Finally, we can clean up the battlefield and add 1 spice to each of the unvisited Dune locations. In round 2, we will be playing for the first place prize, which is an influence bump and 2 intrigue cards. For our hand, we're going to draw the remainder of our starter deck, which is a Signet Ring, Reconnaissance, Dune the Desert Planet, and 2 daggers. First, we'll use the Signet Ring to send an agent to Arakeen. Since we use the Signet Ring, we'll activate our Signet Ring ability, which lets us exchange 1 money for an intrigue card. The intrigue card that we'll draw is Urgent Mission, which lets us recall 1 of our agents. By going to Arakeen, we also get a troop and a card. Let's go ahead and immediately deploy that troop. When we go to draw a card, there's nothing in our draw pile, which means that we have to shuffle our discard pile to make a new draw pile. Since we get to control shuffling in this puzzle, we can arrange the cards however we want. Let's go ahead and put power play on top, then draw that card. With our second agent, we'll use the newly drawn power play card to once again visit secrets. Doing so gives us 2 bumps, which gives us the alliance with the Bene Gesserit. The alliance gives us our 3rd victory point. Additionally, we get 1 intrigue card for visiting secrets and another for crossing the 4 influence threshold. The first intrigue card we want is the Sleeper Must Awaken, which lets us pay 4 spice for a victory point. The second is Bribery, which lets us pay 2 money for an influence bump. Now we can move on to the reveal phase, and we have 2 persuasion points, which we'll use to buy Imperial Spy. Let's go ahead and clean up our cards. Let's collect our rewards from winning the combat. We'll use the influence bump on the Emperor track. Then, the first intrigue card we'll reveal is Know Their Ways, which gives us an influence bump with the Fremen. And the second is Favored Subject, which gives us an influence bump with the Emperor. Like before, we can clean up the battlefield and add 1 spice to each of the unvisited Dune locations. For the round 3 combat, we're going to be playing for 1 influence bump in 2 different factions. We only have 3 cards in our draw pile, which are a Convincing Argument, another Convincing Argument, and a Dune the Desert Planet. Once again, we're going to shuffle our deck. This time, we're going to put Imperial Spy and Diplomacy on top. We can then draw those cards to finish drawing our hand. First, we'll use Diplomacy to send an agent to Still Suits, which gives us a victory point and a water. We now have 4 victory points. And here's the water. Lastly, let's deploy the 1 remaining troop we have. For our second turn, we'll use Dune the Desert Planet to send an agent to Haga Basin, which costs a water. Once there, we can collect the 2 spice that is accumulated, as well as the 2 base spice, for a total of 4 spice. Next, we want to use our intrigue card that lets us recall one of our agents so that we get a 3rd turn this round. We'll use that 3rd turn to play Imperial Spy and send an agent to Wealth, which gets us an influence bump and 2 money. That bump gets us our 5th point, and here's the 2 money. Imperial Spy also lets us trash it in exchange for an intrigue card, so let's go ahead and do that. The intrigue card we want now is Guild Authorization, which gives us an influence bump with the Spacing Guild. During the reveal turn, we have 2 Persuasion, but we don't need to buy anything, so let's go ahead and clean up our hand to make some room. We can now go ahead and play all of the intrigue cards that we've been accumulating, so I'll just lay them all out here. First, we'll pay 4 spice for a victory point. That gets us our 6th point. Next, we'll pay 2 money for an influence bump. We'll use that bump on the Spacing Guild, which gets us our 7th point. Next, we'll play Know Their Ways. After that, we'll play Favored Subject. And finally, we'll play Guild Authorization. During the combat phase of the round, we'd reveal Demand Respect. We'd use the bump from that intrigue card on the Fremen, which gets us our 8th point. We then use the 2 bumps from winning the combat on the Spacing Guild and Emperor factions. And those two alliances get us our 9th and 10th points. To recap, here are all the cards that we ended up playing. We can quickly check our work by summing up the amount of influence we got from playing all of these cards. Starting with the Baron, who gave us 2 influence bumps, we played Seek Allies once for 3, Diplomacy twice for 4 and 5, Power Play for 6 and 7, Imperial Spy for 8, Demand Respect for 9, these next 3 for 10, 11, and 12, Bribery for 13, and the 2 combats gave us 14, 15, and 16. So, 16 influence spread across the 4 factions gives us 8 victory points. Sum that with the other 2 intrigue cards that gave us victory points, and we have a total of 10 points. There's a couple things that I really like about this solution. First, we got 10 victory points, which means that this speedrun works with any number of players. Second, all the cards that we used are from the base game, which means that this speedrun would work with any expansion pack. A natural question is, can we do better? I'd be extremely surprised if we can win in just 2 rounds, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's a solution that lets us get 11 points. There are a couple of reasons why I think we can do better. First, you might have noticed that at the end of the game we had 1 money left over. This might not seem like a big deal, but leaving any resources on the table makes me wonder if there's a better way to allocate them. Additionally, we didn't cross 3 of the 4 influence thresholds until the very end of the game, after combat was resolved. I can't help but wonder if there's a better way to time crossing these thresholds so that you get access to more resources. A third reason that I think we could do better is that the solution outlined doesn't leverage any persuasion points in the last round of the game. If we were somehow able to get to 9 persuasion, we could buy a Spice Must Flow and gain an additional point. Finally, we might be able to do better with some other intrigue cards that offer victory points in the endgame. With all that being said, I'm still really happy with how this solution turned out. While I think I'm personally done exploring this problem, I'm issuing a challenge to anyone who's interested. The challenge is to try to beat my speedrun either by getting 11 points in 3 turns or getting 10 points and beating me in a spice-based tiebreaker. To anyone who attempts the challenge, may thy knife chip and shatter.